Hello, everybody, um, and very happy Caribbean Heritage Month. Welcome to this joint webinar that's hosted by the Wildlife Society's Latin American and Caribbean Working Group, as well as the Coastal and Marine Wildlife Working Group. Today in our webinar, we're going to be talking about Caribbean coasts and coastal ecosystems. And specifically, we're going to be discussing how local partnerships shape efforts to conserve tropical coastal ecosystems. In the context of the Caribbean, this is really important because the Caribbean consists of so many islands and coastal nations in which a lot of small local communities really rely on those coastal resources being maintained. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion, an important discussion for sure. I'm very thankful to everyone who's joined us, as well as all of our panelists who are here with us today. So let us get into things. So to start off, just to introduce myself, first of all, my name is Stephanie Singh. I am the Caribbean Engagement Chair of the Wildlife Society's Latin American and Caribbean Working Group. I'm from Jamaica. I'm a Jamaican ecologist, and right now I am doing my Master's of Science in Biology at UBC Okanagan here in British Columbia, Canada. So in addition to me, there are several hardworking executive members of the Latin American and Caribbean Working Group, many of which are actually here with us in the webinar today. We have Carlos Hinojosa, who is our interim chair, Victoria Aguilar, who is our vice chair, Elizabeth Painter Flores, our secretary, Andrea Miranda, our social media chair, Ana Mega, who is the Brazilian engagement chair, Mahin Oyervides, who is our Mexico engagement chair, Jose Gabriel Martinez Rodriguez, who is the Central American Engagement Chair, as well as Litzy Anaya, who is our International Student Outreach Chair. So a big team has brought you this webinar today. And in addition to us, like I mentioned, this is a joint webinar with the Coastal and Marine Wildlife Working Group, which is led by Hannah Henry, who is their president, as well as Michelle Guines, who is the vice president. So just to introduce the working group and what we do, because this is a relatively new working group, the Latin American and Caribbean Working Group basically serves to create a space for individuals in the Caribbean and Latin America that facilitates collaboration and supporting each other. In a region that has so many different countries and islands that are separated, it can be hard at times to find connection with other wildlife enthusiasts, conservationists, and so on. So we really want to form a community for everyone, basically. And while we're open to everybody, we really want to focus on our main demographics, which include, first of all, international members from Latin America or from the Caribbean. So people, you know, the diaspora who have migrated elsewhere. We also want to focus on people from North America who are conducting research in Latin America and Caribbean, because a lot of conservation initiatives in the region are not necessarily based out of the Caribbean. And then lastly, but definitely not least, we want to focus on, you know, actual Latin American and Caribbean nationals who live there and are looking into getting into conservation. If you want to learn more about what we do, feel free to sign up for a newsletter. The barcode for that is on the screen. And if you missed that, we have it several more times in the presentation, and we'll have a list of resources at the end for you. So yes, our main goals for the webinar today are basically, first of all, to learn about threats to coastal wildlife in the Caribbean, to contextualize things. I know that a lot of our audience members may be based in North America, so they're not familiar with that, or they may be from other Caribbean countries, and each country, while there are some similarities, definitely have their own unique challenges. We also want to discuss community-based conservation programs for coastal ecosystems throughout the Caribbean. And finally, we are going to learn from our panelists how we as early career professionals or students can actually get involved in coastal conservation. And at the end, after we have this discussion with all our panelists, the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions directly in our Q&A session. So I'm very happy to be joined today by our esteemed panel who are representing several countries from across the Caribbean. It's very exciting. To introduce our panelists, first of all, we have Dr. Camilo Trench, who is from Jamaica. He works at the UWI Discovery Bay Marine Lab. Dr. Trench is a marine biologist, lecturer, and marine biologist and lecturer at the Marine Sciences and Marine Sciences and academic coordinator at the University of West Indies Discovery Bay Marine Lab. He spent over 15 years studying mangrove rehabilitation in Jamaica and has collaborated along with his colleagues and the government of Jamaica, consultancy firms, and local NGOs to restore over 50 hectares of mangrove forest in Jamaica. So very substantial coastal ecosystem in the Caribbean. He's also assisted and co-supervised numerous conservation research projects with the University of the West Indies and international students, non-government organizations, as well as government agencies, including the massive North Coast Mangrove Conservation Project, in which private land was actually bought for conservation purposes. So thank you, Dr. Trench, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
We're also joined today by Dr. Rahana Juman from Trinidad and Tobago, who is with the Institute of Marine Affairs. She is the Deputy Director at the Institute of Marine Affairs, which is a government-funded marine research institute. She has been conducting research on coastal ecosystems, including mangrove forest and seagrass beds for the past 25 years, and she has published in internationally peer-reviewed journals, and she's also authored 2 books on coastal wetlands. Dr. Juman is a technical lead on a pilot project for a blue carbon credit scheme for Trinidad and Tobago, and she's also currently working on seagrass and mangrove restoration projects. Dr. Juman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me as well. Thank you.
Of course. And then finally, we have Stephanie Gunby, who is from the Cayman Islands. Stephanie is an early career marine biologist working in the Environmental Management Unit at the Cayman Islands Department of Environment. She has a Bachelor of Science in Marine and Freshwater Biology, and she also has her Master of Science in Pathobiology. Her work so far has included coral and sea turtle conservation, although her current role focuses mostly on sustainable development. She currently assists with the department's sea turtle nest monitoring, very cute. And in 2024, she actually led the country's first conservation detection dog project, where she worked with training a dog to locate misoriented sea turtle hatchlings. So Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for inviting me to be here.
Of course. Okay, so I am going to go into a few prompts that we have to get things going for our panelists, and I'm going to stop sharing my presentation for a bit just so we can focus on our panelist discussion. So the first question that I have for everybody is kind of an icebreaker, and I invite audience members, if they have access to the chat, to put it in there what country they're from and also answer this question. So briefly, just to give context to the audience, since everyone is from completely different countries, I'd like to ask if we could each list the top 3 challenges that threaten coastal wildlife in each of our countries. Maybe going in order of introductions, we could start with Dr. Camilo Trench. What are the top 3 challenges for coastal conservation in Jamaica?
Okay, thank you. I would say the top 3, in my opinion, for Jamaica. Number 1 would be enforcement of our plethora of laws. So on paper, we do have a lot of laws that protect wildlife and ecosystems, but we do have issues with the enforcement of these laws. So sometimes they're not enacted or enforced at all, or the government regulatory agencies do not have the staff or the teeth, or sometimes the legal acumen and backing to make it effective. Should I go with my other 2?
Yes.
And then on the note of laws, while we do have a lot of laws, we do have some laws that are really outdated and need some refinement. And let me give you an example. So in Jamaica, it is illegal to reclaim or dump a wetland for unpermitted use. However, there is no law protecting mangroves as a species. So for example, an individual mangrove tree, its protection doesn't fall anywhere. But as an ecosystem, as a wetland, it's illegal to dump a wetland or to damage a wetland. But the individual tree itself, there's nothing stopping somebody from cutting down an individual tree. Get where I'm going?
Yeah.
And the third one, I think, is I'm sure everybody can identify with this one, development pressure. But of course, development has to happen. But the issue with our development sometimes when it comes to some critical habitats is the development with political influence. So normally, if a developer applies for such a permit, we do have qualified technical persons in these government agencies who will review it and they may say yes, no, or maybe. If they do say no, then there is room for ministerial oversight. So I call it political interference. So the prime minister or the minister with responsibility for that agency can basically overrule the rulings of all the qualified technocrats within that organization, which I think is very sad. So those are my top three.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, I can relate to this because I'm from Jamaica, so I see it firsthand. But I definitely think that the role that policy plays is definitely not spoken about enough. And I'm happy that you brought it up because at the end of the day, no matter how much people are researching or getting information towards conservation, there has to be that support from decision makers as well, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so those are the challenges that we're facing in Jamaica. I'm going to hand the question over to Dr. Hannah Juman in Trinidad. What are the challenges that you're seeing with coastal conservation?
So first of all, I just like for those who know, Trinidad is the most southern island of the Caribbean. We're like about 7 miles off of Venezuela. So we're very rich in terms of biodiversity because it's very much South American biodiversity. But in terms of the challenges we face, similar to Jamaica, habitat destruction, our coastal land is like high value real estate and everybody wants a view of the ocean. So a lot of our development whether it's hotel development, industrial development, residential development, takes place along our coast. And with that, we have lost more than 50% of our mangrove forests. We've lost a lot of seagrass beds here in Trinidad and Tobago, and the remaining ecosystems, of course, are being negatively impacted by build development. So that would be number one. Number two is overexploitation or overharvesting of species, or sometimes using destructive harvesting methods. Like, for instance, people harvest the mangrove oysters, but they would cut the mangrove roots to harvest the oyster. That's the habitat. So when you cut the roots, there's nowhere for the oysters to settle. So that is a big issue, as well as pollution. Pollution is a major, major concern because once you have a lot of it land-based pollution, it impacts on ecosystems. And of course, when you impact the ecosystem, you impact on the biodiversity. So I would say those are three of the critical ones. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you so much. I think that's a lot of very big threats overlapping. Do you find that they tend to influence each other?
Definitely. Because pollution and habitat destruction a lot of times go hand in hand. You know,
Yeah, and I suppose from the development as well, that adds a lot of pollution to coastal ecosystems.
a lot of it is, well, land-based pollution would be not only from development in terms of industry and so on, but you also have from activities such as agriculture, quarrying. You know, you have a lot of nutrients entering the marine environment and they are not really good for coral reef. A lot of our coral reefs are being impacted by high nutrients, so they're transitioning from hard coral cover to soft coral and algae. You know, so those are some of the things. So that's a critical problem and it's not that easy to address, unfortunately.
Oh, I want to ask one more thing because I'm curious and I'm not that familiar with the wildlife in Trinidad. You had mentioned the seagrass. What are
Mhm.
some of the species that you guys have that rely on seagrass? Because I know it's a very important, like fundamental level of ecosystems.
Yeah. So green turtles, a lot of the herbivorous the green turtles, they rely on seagrasses. We have things like sea urchins and oyster conch, right? And I remember when I first started sampling the seagrass bed, we had a variety of fish species, a lot of them juvenile fish, that utilizes seagrasses for as habitat, like snappers and grunts. And I remember even having seahorses. We had seahorses in our seagrass beds. Yes, having grown up in my time on Sesame Street, you used to think a seahorse was a big thing, and then you realize very tiny little thing, and you would see them attach onto the seagrass bed. So those are some of the things that we have on our
Oh, yeah, that's fantastic to hear. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to discussing more about how we can actually keep those species around.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to pass the question over to Stephanie. For the Cayman Islands, what would you say are the top three threats that you see towards coastal conservation? And I know you do turtle work, or you've done turtle work, which is a bit of what we just touched on.
Yeah, so nice transition into the turtles with the seagrass beds. So in Cayman here, I would say that probably the top three challenges that we have threatening coastal wildlife, well, more specifically are sea turtles, because that's mostly the perspective that I'm going to talk today is about our turtles. In no particular order would probably be people, are one of our biggest threats. So that includes threats such as poaching, poaching of the turtles that come up on the nest to lay. Turtle meat is a very culturally significant food in Cayman, and turtling plays a big part in Caymanian heritage. So although poaching is no longer allowed, we still do have some people who are a little bit stuck in their ways and can't really um, necessarily maybe see the benefit that the conservation side of it has and why poaching is maybe bad nowadays, especially as virtually all sea turtles are endangered. Um, and also, in terms of people, we experience loss of life due to boat strikes, especially during the nesting season where the bigger turtles are coming in, and they're mating normally near the surface of the water. More people living in Cayman as well. We've had a significant population increase, has also led to an increase in development, which is definitely another threat. Um, so that increase in development has led to beach erosion as buildings were initially built too close to our beach here, and also built in such a way where, for example, excavating sand off of the beach was a standard practice. So a lot of sand was removed from the beach system, and that's now coming back to bite us as we're experiencing the erosion, which leads to loss of habitat. And then an increase in development also brings the threat for artificial lighting, which is a big threat for sea turtles. It's both a threat to the nesting turtles and hatchlings, as hatchlings normally emerge in the evenings or late at night, and turtles normally come up in the night to lay. And lastly, I would probably say climate change. As it's impacted the quality of habitat that exists for sea turtles, but also has physiological impacts on the turtles themselves. So, for example, sea turtles have a temperature dependent sex determination. So, hotter temperature with climate change, which we're definitely feeling here in Cayman as everywhere around the world is, means hotter sand temperatures. And if the temperatures are warmer, more females will develop. So, less males are being produced hypothetically. And then also with rising sea levels as well, that also has likely played a factor into the beach erosion issue as well. So that's where the loss of habitat comes into.
Oh, okay. I mean, that also kind of sounds like a very complicated, like intermingling of threats, I suppose. But
Yeah.
and I'm sure like all of the islands are, of course, affected by climate change, but it is very interesting to hear that interaction between like human-based threats and the pressures that are coming from development, as well as pressures that are coming from environmental changes. And I
Kind
guess
of a
you'll talk,
double whammy. Yeah.
yeah, and I guess you'll talk about it a bit more as well. But I feel like it also kind of touches a bit on what Dr. Trench spoke about before with regard to like enforcing policy, to at least try and control for the human-based threats.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So now that we basically know a bit about the challenges that are being faced in a few of our representative Caribbean countries, I want to ask our panelists now to tell us a bit about the work that you do for coastal conservation, specifically how you work with small and local communities to address the problems that you just brought up. Since, like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, a lot of Caribbean communities, especially those on the coast, are going to be relying on coastal resources, whether it's out of necessity or culturally, like Stephanie had just mentioned a bit. And I'm going to do reverse order this time. So I'm going to throw the question back to you, Stephanie, so you can kind of elaborate on what you just spoke about, especially like the regulation, regarding sea turtle poaching and that conflict between like community, culture, but needing to conserve the turtles.
Yeah, sure. So the unit that I work in at the Department of Environment is the Environmental Management Unit, or the EMU unit. And we work a lot with the community, probably mostly as it relates to development, whereas I would say our department's sea turtle program, in order to help conserve turtles generally, um, relies on local partnerships as well and overseas partners. And the threats that they try to tackle are probably more related to climate change in terms of the research work that they do. Um, but I could probably break it down a bit more. So I'll talk about the development side of things first. So I would say that one of the biggest or most common ways from a development standpoint that my unit works with local communities is probably through the implementation of turtle-friendly lighting for coastal properties that are on sea turtle nesting beaches. So this has included a retrofit program that the department has for properties that were already existing prior to when our current law, which was passed only in 2020, was in place, which now requires any newly built properties on critical sea turtle habitat to have a turtle-friendly lighting plan. And then, of course, now, after that law, also in addition to the retrofit, working with property owners of new builds to ensure that they have the right lighting plans, they've got everything that they need, they're in compliance with what our requirements are, and that where they're guiding them through the process and helping them with it. As at least in Cayman, it's still a relatively new practice compared to other places. Like I know Florida, which I think has been doing it for probably at least like 2 decades now. So they've already got a little bit of practice under their belt with the whole turtle-friendly lighting thing.
What
Um,
does turtle-friendly lighting entail?
yeah, so turtle-friendly lighting is basically amber lighting that the turtles are less sensitive to. So they can't see amber light the way that they can see like white light that people normally like to install. So installing that on your properties helps to keep turtles safe and help to prevent misorientations, both of the hatchlings when they emerge from the nests, but also helps to not disorient nesting females that come up to lay. Like, for example, on some properties that have really bright lights, our turtle team has got called out to nesting females that have fallen into pools and they're just swimming around in people's pools because they got distracted by the lights and couldn't find their way back to the water. And same thing with hatchlings. So turtle-friendly lighting is really important, considering that with sea turtles, their survival rate is pretty low. It's estimated that only 1 in 1,000 sea turtles will make it to maturity and adulthood. So every sea turtle counts, which is why turtle-friendly lighting is really important and something that we've been trying to push for quite a long time here. So we were happy when that law came into effect in 2020, with now requiring any newly built properties to have a turtle-friendly lighting plan. Um, but I would say in addition to that, another way that we work with the local community here from a development standpoint to help protect turtles is through the technical advice that our unit gives. So the environmental management unit I'm a part of, we mostly provide technical advice on development projects, both to government agencies and the private sector when we're consulted. And we can also put associated conditions in with that advice. So, for example, here in Cayman, if someone wants to build a house on the beach, they submit their application and plans to our planning department. The planning department consults with us to gather our comments on any potential environmental impacts that could occur as a result of that development. We look on all of our maps and data that we've collected. We can see where turtle critical habitat is, which beaches are nesting, where turtles have laid. And if that beach does happen to be a turtle nesting beach, we can then require certain turtle conditions be placed on that application. And these conditions can also change on the time of year, so whether it's sea turtle nesting season or not. So just for example, if it is sea turtle nesting season, some of our typical turtle conditions include installing what we call a turtle fence, which is basically a plywood fence embedded like 2 feet deep into the sand, which comes up about 2 feet high, around 75-ish feet from the high water mark, and it encloses the construction space. So prior to the installation of that fence, our team would go out to the site, have a quick look, make sure there's no nests already. We would say, all right, no nests, you're good to go. They would put in their turtle fence, and then once it's installed, we'd go out, make sure it looks good, it's actually been installed properly. So that's an example of a condition. And then other conditions that we can apply to applications to try and help protect turtles are ensuring that all the stockpiling of materials occurs behind that fence. So you'd be surprised we've actually, or so the team tells me, they've actually had turtles nest in stockpiled material before. So that's obviously not ideal, but it can happen. And then another condition is any sand that's excavated during construction should be retained on the site, and then once development is finished, placed back onto the beach so that we're not, again, removing sand out of the dynamic beach system and arguably adding to beach erosion down the line. So that's sort of things that we can do. And then, of course, the turtle-friendly lighting is another condition that we can now require. So that's sort of from a development perspective, how we work with people locally to try and change the attitude, I guess, around development so that we are considering the environment as well, and specifically sea turtles. I guess the other threat that I mentioned with climate change. So from a climate change perspective, the turtle program that we have here quite heavily relies on the local community. Cayman is an archipelago, so we've got 3 islands. I'm on Grand Cayman, the biggest one, and then we've got Little Cayman and Cayman Brac. And between the 3 islands, we have over 120 volunteers that work with the sea turtle program and help with daily nest monitoring. So those volunteers will walk the beach in the early morning, report any activity to our turtle team, and then the turtle team can take a more targeted approach and go out and respond to activity as it's reported. So in Grand Cayman especially, we have nesting on beaches all around the island. I mean, the island is pretty small, like 75 square miles, but still, if the core team, the core turtle team, was having to walk all of those beaches and respond to all those new activities on a daily basis, it would be a very full day and we would probably fall behind pretty quickly. So this way, we've at least got the main stretches of beach covered. And those activities are reported relatively early each morning. So it gives our core turtle team a more efficient approach in our responses. So those volunteers have been really crucial, and that local partnership with people signing up to be trained and be volunteers has really been a big help for the turtle team, I would say.
Yeah.
And then as well too, because of that, and because our turtle team is pretty well known and like recognized now when we're out in the field and walking the beaches and responding to activity, we also rely on the community to report any turtle related issues to our turtle hotline. So for example, we have pretty good partnerships with all the local dive companies. So if they're out diving and they see a turtle entangled in fishing line, for example, they call up the hotline and then we can gather the team and go try to track that individual down to do little rescue missions like that, per se.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
So
so
it sounds
that's
like,
also worked
yeah,
out really well.
it sounds like you guys have it's really good that you've been able to establish that kind of massive network of volunteers.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing I think to like try and enforce the regulations, but when you actually get the community involved, then they also appreciate the value of the conservation effort and it kind of makes things work a lot better. There's a
Yeah,
lot
I
less
think,
pushback
yeah,
for
for
sure.
sure. Getting people involved, we've definitely seen the positives. Like I said, like the team is pretty well known now, and we do get a lot of people, asking to intern with the team or if they can sign up to be volunteers. So it is kind of really helping to bring, or it has helped to bring more awareness to turtle conservation, especially locally as well, which has been a big plus.
Okay, that's awesome. And near the end of the webinar, I'm going to ask you to tell everybody a bit more about signing up to volunteer or intern and get
Yep.
involved. Okay, thank you so much for telling us about turtle conservation in Cayman. It's fantastic to hear both sides of regulation from a development standpoint on a larger scale, as well as seeing that community is also getting involved. So it sounds like you guys really have it together. Okay. I'm gonna pass the question on to Dr. Juman. I'm gonna ask you, what is the Institute of Marine Affairs doing? How are you working with small communities, specifically towards coastal conservation over in Trinidad?
Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the Institute of Marine Affairs. We're a government-funded research institution, and we're mandated to conduct applied research so that we can advise government on the sustainable management of our coastal resources. And part of our mandate is also public education and outreach. So we do a lot of outreach in schools and among communities. But I'll just focus on a couple projects where we're really engaging with communities. Um, we started through a public-private partnership. We started a restoration project, coral reef and seagrass restoration project called the Marine Resilience Initiative, or MARIN. And we're looking at larval-based coral propagation. So part of it is looking at the spawning of the corals and capturing the seed when the corals spawn, the larvae, and then fertilization, and then growing them in what we call cribs, and then putting them back out on the reef. And for that, we have engaged with communities and with divers and so forth. It's interesting because, nobody really knew about coral spawning or never took interest in coral spawning. And it's amazing when you put that out on social media and so on, how many people, are so interested to go out and see this happening. So some of the dive shops are actually using it as part of their marketing strategy as well. So we use that. We've gotten the communities engaged in the restoration, as well as for the seagrasses, going out there to plant the seagrasses. We have established what we call a marine resilience network, and the whole intent is to build ocean stewardship. We realize that if we depend on the government, a lot of things wouldn't get done. So we have to work with communities people are on the ground, who are engaged, who are dependent on coastal resources to help us manage those resources. So it's building their capacity through training and so forth. And even with that, we have the threat of the stony coral tissue loss disease. So that has been causing lots of problems throughout the Caribbean. It hasn't been recorded yet in Trinidad and Tobago, but in anticipation for that, we have been working with communities and building their capacity to identify the disease if they see it, so they could report it and that sort of stuff, and how they can help us to treat with the disease. In addition, like most of the islands, we've had issues with the lionfish invasion. So part of it was working with the communities to manage the lionfish. We held derbies and so on to encourage people to remove the lionfish, and also to develop a taste for the lionfish, because we if they eat it, to beat it, sort of thing. So we've spent a lot of time working with communities, because initially they were afraid to eat it. Everybody was like, it was poisonous. You really had to change attitude. And now we have where people are actually harvesting it and selling it, and it's being sold in restaurants and so on for the tourists. we also in Trinidad have, we're one of the largest nesting sites for the leatherback turtle. So for turtle management, again, we're engaged with a lot of the communities because they're on the ground there, they're doing the monitoring. We work with them to, like, we would have built capacity in terms of beach monitoring, doing beach profiling so that they could monitor the beach for erosion, coastal erosion, which is also a problem here in Trinidad. So, and we work with them in terms of, just management of turtles. Another issue that is common throughout the Caribbean is sargassum. A lot of sargassum coming in, affecting a lot of communities, including turtles, turtle nesting beaches and so forth. So we've been working with communities to help address the problem, trying to alleviate the problem. And finally, one of the other things that we do a lot is coastal cleanups. So even in terms of mangrove, it's amazing how much litter is on our beaches and our wetlands and so on. So we have a new project where we're looking at plastic pollution in particular, but it's about, removing the garbage, but it's more than just removing the garbage. It's trying to prevent people from throwing the garbage in and putting systems in place for garbage collection so they don't have that impact on the marine environment. So those are some of the things we're doing in terms of engaging with communities.
Thank you. That's really fantastic to hear. And it's actually something I haven't heard before because I know for conservation programs, one of the limiting factors is a lot of the times in certain places support from the government. So hearing that you kind of bypass that by involving the community, which would be more meaningful anyway. Yeah.
I'm not bypassing it because I work for the
Or,
government, right? But
yeah.
I'm not bypassing it, but it's about building the capacity of the communities and working with the communities to get action on the ground. Because like Mr. Trench, Dr. Trench said earlier, you have the policies, but there's a lack of enforcement. And many times they will tell you the reason that there's no enforcement is because there's no capacity. They don't have funding and all that sort of stuff. So it's really about educating the community so that they can kind of police themselves.
Yeah, which is fantastic. Have you seen that kind of change since you've been working with communities?
Yes, I've been around for a long time. So in my time, I've seen where people are now aware of their environment. And I know like when we do consultations with fishers, they know they need the mangrove in order to have it as a nursery. They're more aware now, so there is some progress, but there's room for a lot more. So we have to continue doing it, continue outreach and education and engagement. That's critical.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Trench, I'm going to pass the question on to you. So could you tell us a bit about the work that you've been doing with small communities towards coastal conservation?
Okay, thank you. And as I heard Dr. Juman speak about the efforts that they've been doing in terms of lionfish, I'm reminded that I was part of the team that visited Trinidad many years ago with initial training for the lionfish, the Eat Them to Beat Them campaign. So part of what we do is collaboration, and we have to recognize as ecologists or conservationists, whether we're marine or not, that we are in one world, we're in one region, so we have to work together a whole lot. I'll skip ahead to um, let me start at the top. Flexi, one of the things that we certainly do, or one of the approaches we have, is flexibility and collaboration. A lot of the projects that we do in terms of conservation, we could not do it without government agencies and non-government agencies and partners. So after all, we're all fighting for the same team. So we try to see how we can work together. So one of the things that we do at the UA Discovery Bay Marine Lab, we work with our government and NGO partners. For example, Jamaica, since 2009, we have established, they're no longer called special fishery conservation areas, they call them fish sanctuaries now. So these fish sanctuaries are maybe just over 10, 15 years old, some of them. So they're relatively new. But of course, we try to work with the NGO groups that run these fish sanctuaries as much as possible. So for example, we had a project that we wrote that was funded through the National Conservation Trust Fund of Jamaica, where we did water sampling, nutrient testing across these fish sanctuaries along the north coast of Jamaica. We didn't just do it as scientists, we brought the fish sanctuary partners in so that they were a part of collecting these specimens and learning how to run the test. Of course, we had to have particular persons of a particular educational level to be in it. So like the fish sanctuary managers or the supervisors were there with us. We are also one of the largest diving platforms in Jamaica. So we open up ourselves and make ourselves available for training for these partners. And it only makes them better. We have done a number of trainings and collaboration with NGOs. One of the things that we do here at the University of West Indies in Jamaica and Mona, we ensure that our research is applied. So not just research for academic reasons, but we have targeted research, what the country normally via the regulatory agencies needs. So for example, many moons ago, as I heard Dr. Juman mention harvesting oysters, that was something that our regulatory agency wanted to see. Who are using oysters out in Kingston? So we actually had a student conduct a study on oyster harvesting in the Kingston Harbor. And even though it was an undergraduate project, it was exactly a little snapshot of what they wanted to see. So we have been doing a number of projects, whether from seagrass, corals, mangroves, a lot of terrestrial stuff too, but my forte is the marine stuff. So through our students, we've been doing a lot of applied research, and we've been making these researches or the outcomes known, whether through social media, print media, or through publications, the traditional methods. And communication is a very important part of that. So let's say if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around, does it make a sound? Well, if you do work and you don't share it, then nobody knows about it. So it's not just what we publish in the fancy journals, but try to put it in a newspaper article. Try to get it on national primetime television. One of my proudest achievements in Jamaica is seeing mangrove forests on primetime television. We actually collaborated with a journalist through the RGR communication group, and they did a whole documentary. It was called Where Have the Mangroves Gone? So persons like myself and many other NGOs and experts across the island were featured in that. And they run it literally after the primetime news at 8 p.m. So I'm sure hundreds of thousands of persons saw that. Some persons who may not even have known what a mangrove was many years ago. Earlier, I talked about capacity building. So we do that through our students. We have undergraduate students, master students, PhD students, and we also take on interns where the graduates or pre-graduates can come on stream with us and they can get their work experience while furthering our good work. We cycle through about 10 to 15 interns here annually that can say, hey, I've worked at the Discovery Bay Marine Lab. I have something substantial on my resume. I have substantial work experience, and I was a part of that positive change. So those are just some of the things we do. I'll give you one example of collaboration and communication. My main forte is mangroves. So we have a project called the North Coast Mangrove Conservation Project. And that project was a little bit different and difficult. We advocated the government, our environmental agency is called NEPA, National Environment and Planning Agency. So through our intervention, we stumbled upon some private land that was owned by somebody who bought the land many decades ago, wasn't really interested in it. We had a lot of informal settlers colonizing this land and turning it into homes because persons need somewhere to live, and one of the easiest places to live, believe it or not, is in a wetland. All it takes is one truckload of rubble, which sometimes is free. And if it's private land and the government isn't paying keen attention, then you'll have a small community there in 2 years. So we can avert that by having the government buy this land. I know that government is slated for tree protection and tree preservation. Recently, I mean, literally like last week, we did a restoration of a section there that was very problematic because of the boundary issues. And I can tell you, if it wasn't for our task force that we established, we would not have pulled it through. And this task force has us as a university, it has the forestry department, it has the National Environment and Planning Agency, it has the National Land Agency, which are very key in overcoming some of our land and boundary issues. Trust me, just having a direct line to government agencies sometimes make a big difference. Also, we had the municipal corporation. In Jamaica, we call them our parish councils, where these guys do not traditionally do environmental monitoring. They give building permits. And traditionally, they give a building permit, they don't really care if this building is in a wetland or in a hill. Once the building is sound and the person pays their permits, they walk away. But we had a municipal corporation, or we do have them all involved in this project. So something goes wrong, we have a direct line with all of those government partners, and that community does not have an NGO or a strong structure. So something like that was so important. And now that we're poised to conserve over 50 acres of mangrove forest right there. And so far, I think the project is going well despite some of the challenges. And it's really a landmark case for us here in Jamaica, having private lands for mangrove conservation. Never been done before. So very proud of that. And collaboration and communication was all key elements to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And congratulations on, putting all of your mangrove work out there. Like you had mentioned at the beginning, I think like sometimes there's a disconnect between, research and it only being published in academia and not making it out, to communities where it matters. So I'm very happy to hear you advocating for that and also, working with institutions that traditionally aren't involved in conservation but could have a lot of power there. So that's really exciting to hear. Okay. So as we're wrapping things up, I'm gonna invite the audience to ask questions to our panelists. You can type your questions in the Q&A, and as they come up, I will read them out for our panelists to answer. So if you have any questions for anybody, feel free to send them in the Q&A now.
I
Okay.
guess this question kind of goes out to all of you guys. How has I mean, I guess for the Cayman Islands, they're still considered a UK territory, but how has sovereignty changed how conservation is approached in your countries? If you know of any stories or know of the history of how it's changed at all.
Well, I could probably start. So we were former British colony, and some of our legislation, our forestry legislation and our fisheries legislation, were way back when we were still a colony. So we're in the process of updating all these legislation and so forth. And even, I mean, like Camilo, just like me, we're mangrove people, and perception before, mangroves were thought of as areas that are muddy and mosquitoes and malaria, and a lot of effort was spent on filling them in and so on because of malaria, and changing that perception of wetlands from a wasteland to something of value. It takes a lot of time, but we're getting there. So I think, those are some of the things in terms of how things have changed from colonial times to now. And we're still basically some of the things that were done during colonial times, like alterations that were made to our wetlands, hydrological changes for oil and gas exploration, for agriculture. We're now feeling the impacts of some of it, and we're now trying to, adjust some of these things in our rehabilitation efforts. So.
For Cayman, I guess, as you said, yeah, Cayman is a UK overseas territory still. I would say that having that sort of, I guess, the support from the UK environmentally has, I guess, helped keep Cayman accountable a little bit. So just for example, I'm not directly involved with this program, but Cayman is part of the UK's Blue Belt program and the Blue Belt program for their overseas territories. So that program, from my understanding, basically looks at conserving Cayman's offshore environment, so our waters, but way out there. So having that program kind of keeps us accountable and sort of, we have to meet certain deadlines for that program. There's certain things that we have to be a part of, certain projects that we have to look into. So that's sort of, I guess, in a way been a benefit for us. But yeah, maybe someone who has been at the department for a little bit longer could say how it's changed. But because I know that program, the Blue Belt program, we only joined fairly recently as well, I believe.
So in the Q&A, I have a few questions where people are asking about how can they get involved and for internship opportunities. So at the end of everything, I'm actually going to share some resources as well as information on all the institutions that everyone is from and their contact information. So you can reach out to learn more about internship opportunities. I do have a question in here for Dr. Juman about sargassum. So this is very interesting. So we have someone who is from Alabama, and apparently there they deal with sargassum every year for about a month. But for them, it's a relatively small issue, so they've never heard of the negative impacts or it being an environmental issue. So they're just asking what kind of issues does sargassum bloom actually cause?
So we used to get floating sargassum on a regular basis in small quantities, but since 2011, we've been getting massive amounts of sargassum washing up on our beaches, pelagic sargassum, primarily 2 species. And when it washes up in that quantity, it affects people that utilize this space. It affects our tourism sector because a lot of our beaches are covered with sargassum. And of course, when the sargassum comes up and it rots, it emits hydrogen sulfide. It smells really bad. There's a lot of flies. So it impacts on your tourism sector. It impacts on your fishing sector. Your fishers sometimes can't even go out with their boats because of the sargassum. And they complain when they throw their net, they pick up so much sargassum that it actually rips the net. Right? So it impacts the fish, it impacts the navigation, people with navigation, but it also impacts the ecosystem. We have issues like for turtle nesting. We've had instances where the turtles cannot come in or the hatchlings, they cannot go out, right? And if you have sargassum that comes in and you say they're about a meter thick, they cover your coral reefs. We've had instances where the sargassum came in 2015 and actually we lost our seagrasses in a particular area because they were basically smothered by the sargassum. And then, of course, there's health issues now that are coming up. People are reporting health issues because of the gases that are emitted. Also, sargassum also picks up heavy metals. So you have to be careful in terms of the heavy metal when people utilize it, the heavy metals that may be in the sargassum. So those are some of the main issues. I mean, just being in the environment and waking up one morning and seeing the entire coastline filled with sargassum, it's really bad. And it's now they've identified a new source of sargassum, and the reason why we have so much sargassum coming up is because of climate change. So it's being called the new normal. So we have to learn to live with it or adapt to it.
Okay, thank you so much. That's really interesting to hear, and the differences between how sargassum can exist in different ecosystems. Okay, so I think we have 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to wrap up. Thank you again to everybody for sharing all the amazing conservation work that you're doing. So I'm going to wrap things up now. Okay, so just to address a lot of the questions regarding connecting with panelists, internship opportunities and so on. We have a lot of resources here for you. And if you can screenshot this, and if you still need this information afterwards, feel free to send us an email and we'll be happy to share this with you or any other additional resources we can provide. So our working group actually has a page on our website where we post whatever job and volunteer opportunities in the Caribbean we find. So you can definitely keep an eye out there if you're interested in getting involved. And we do this for as as many countries as we can find, not just the 3 that we discussed today. And of course, the organizations for our panelists, we have the Cayman Islands Department of Environment, the Discovery Bay Marine Lab, and the Institute of Marine Affairs. If you want more updates on these kind of events, you can join the Latin American and Caribbean Working Group by going to our membership page, and you can also join the Coastal Marine Wildlife Working Group as well, and we've got the barcodes there. And again, if you aren't able to get all of this information, we'll be happy to share it with you after the webinar if you shoot us an email. We also have a suggestion form, so any suggestions for events you want to see the working group do, any feedback on this webinar, please scan that code and fill out the survey that we have there. We are very happy and very thankful for everyone's input in that. And finally, thank you. So again, that's the information for the Latin American and Caribbean Working Group, as well as the Coastal and Marine Wildlife Working Group. This is the contact information for all of our lovely panelists. I can't thank you enough again for joining us and sharing your experiences with us. This has been extremely insightful, and I am just so happy to be able to talk about Caribbean conservation programs in such a large setting. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free, to reach out to the panelists, reach out to me, or the working group. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.